establishment. In this campus, students learn their skills and deepen their knowledge in the fields of Islam, social sciences, economics and business, education, law, science and technology, and the arts.
Check.
UIII is determined to help talented young people from all over the world. So this campus is made for talented youths to flourish. Thus, hundreds of prestigious young students from 5 continents have been registered as UIII students and are occupying our dormitories. At UIII, they study with professors, lecturers, academics, and researchers who have experience teaching in world campuses, and graduates from well-known universities in Asia, America, Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. With strong support from the government of Indonesia, UIII continues to build infrastructure, management, faculty and library buildings, lecturer housing, dormitories, sports facilities, reforestation programs, and much, much more. We believe we can grow bigger than our dreams and hopes. We strive to continue to make improvements through various innovations, collaborations, as well as dialogue with students, lecturers, and staff in carrying out the university's vision and mission. Come to UIII and join future leaders from various countries to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth.
Everyone has their own story and their own journey. Each person's journey is unique. They have their own set of goals. So, what is the most important part of a journey? Is it the beginning? Is it the people you meet during the journey? At the Faculty of Islamic Studies, every journey matters, and every part of that journey is priceless.
Welcome to the Faculty of Islamic Studies at the Indonesian International Islamic University.
As part of the newly established international university, aiming to position itself as one of the leading institutes for higher learning in the Muslim world by developing excellent graduate degree programs, innovative research, and vibrant socio-cultural activities, the Faculty of Islamic Studies has established a strong foundation since its inauguration in September 2021 by recruiting the best faculty members, designing innovative curriculum, and organizing numerous academic and research activities.
Our journey began with a single goal in mind: creating a better world by providing excellent education and research on Islam and society in the Muslim world. We take the first step by establishing a world-class Islamic Studies faculty, where you can experience an international environment while pursuing classical and contemporary approaches in Islamic studies. A journey is not something you should undertake alone. Along your journey, you will walk alongside others who share the same vision and goals. The Faculty of Islamic Studies is a place where students from various countries, more than 15 countries, can experience the richness and diversity of Indonesian society while living with the universal values of Islam. We care about your journey in education, and so you'll be guided by the best lecturers with numerous accomplishments and awards. They are graduates of the best universities worldwide, of both Western and Middle Eastern countries. In addition, all lecturers at the Faculty of Islamic Studies actively contribute to research and development at various institutions on a national and international scale, and you will be a part of it as well. We understand your strong desire to grow and innovate. We are constantly developing academic programs such as dual degree programs and research collaboration in cooperation with campuses in various countries, including the United Kingdom and Egypt. All programs are designed to produce Islamic studies experts who are masters in classical Islamic texts and modern social science, and you will participate directly.
Faculty of Islamic Studies at the Indonesian International Islamic University is the best place for those who wish not only to explore Islamic studies, but also to discover Islamic civilization in Indonesia and the global Muslim world that can make a positive contribution in the discovery of knowledge and the preservation of world civilization. Graduates of the Faculty of Islamic Studies are expected to advance their career in academia, research institutions, policy-making institutions, international consulting agency, diplomatic work, government sectors, and also international organizations.
You want freedom and comfort, and so do we. We provide the best facilities to help you become an active and innovative generation in all aspects of life, both academic and non-academic. You will always have enough space to grow, together. Time will always be your friend, because everything you need can be accessed whenever you want. Nothing can stop you, and the sky is the limit. We will grow continuously along the journey, helping you develop all of your intelligence, physically, mentally, and spiritually. By doing so, we will produce critical human beings, capable of making a positive impact on social, political, and cultural aspects of life in Muslim societies.
Yes, it's you.
An exciting journey, isn't it? Your journey to an international education will start in Depok City, a city with numerous natural resources, with huge potential and opportunity waiting to be explored. Whether you want to see classic or latte art, Depok has everything you need to support you in your education journey. Get ready. It is time to make your own story. At the Faculty of Islamic Studies at UIII, we are ready to accompany you along this incredible journey.
Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. Established on June 5th, 2018. This campus is expected to be a place for the growth of faith and humanity. We recognize truth and humanity as our motto because we believe that Islamic values and humanity are always connected.
As an inclusive campus, UIIU welcomes anyone, regardless of differences in religious background, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, and abilities.
Delivering an international standard education, UIIU is the only university in Indonesia that focuses on postgraduate education, namely master's and doctoral programs, since its establishment. In this campus, students learn their skills and deepen their knowledge in the fields of Islam, social sciences, economics and business, education, law, science and technology, and the arts. UIIU is determined to help talented young people from all over the world, so this campus is made for talented youths to flourish. Thus, hundreds of prestigious young students from 5 continents have been registered as UIIU students and are occupying our dormitories. At UIIU, they study with professors, lecturers, academics, and researchers who have experience teaching in world campuses and graduates from well-known universities in Asia, America, Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. With strong support from the government of Indonesia, UIIU continues to build infrastructure, management, faculty and library buildings, lecturer housing, dormitories, sports facilities, reforestation programs, and much, much more. We believe we can grow bigger than our dreams and hopes. We strive to continue to make improvements through various innovations, collaborations, as well as dialogue with students, lecturers, and staff in carrying out the university's vision and mission. Come to UIIU and join future leaders from various countries to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth.
Everyone has their own story and their own journey. Each person's journey is unique. They have their own set of goals. So, what is the most important part of a journey? Is it the beginning? Is it the people you meet during the journey? At the Faculty of Islamic Studies, every journey matters, and every part of that journey is priceless.
Welcome to the Faculty of Islamic Studies at the Indonesian International Islamic University.
As part of the newly established international university, aiming to position itself as one of the leading institutes for higher learning in the Muslim world by developing excellent graduate degree programs, innovative research, and vibrant socio-cultural activities, the Faculty of Islamic Studies has established a strong foundation since its inauguration in September 2021 by recruiting the best faculty members, designing innovative curriculum, and organizing numerous academic and research activities.
Our journey began with a single goal in mind: creating a better world by providing excellent education and research on Islam and society in the Muslim world. We take the first step by establishing a world-class Islamic Studies faculty, where you can experience an international environment while pursuing classical and contemporary approaches in Islamic studies. A journey is not something you should undertake alone. Along your journey, you will walk alongside others who share the same vision and goals. The Faculty of Islamic Studies is a place where students from various countries, more than 15 countries, can experience the richness and diversity of Indonesian society while living with the universal values of Islam. We care about your journey in education, and so you'll be guided by the best lecturers with numerous accomplishments and awards. They are graduates of the best universities worldwide, of both Western and Middle Eastern countries. In addition, all lecturers at the Faculty of Islamic Studies actively contribute to research and development at various institutions on a national and international scale, and you will be a part of it as well. We understand your strong desire to grow and innovate. We are constantly developing academic programs such as dual degree programs and research collaboration in cooperation with campuses in various countries, including the United Kingdom and Egypt. All programs are designed to produce Islamic studies experts who are masters in classical Islamic texts and modern social science, and you will participate directly.
Faculty of Islamic Studies at the Indonesian International Islamic University is the best place for those who wish not only to explore Islamic studies, but also to discover Islamic civilization in Indonesia and the global Muslim world that can make a positive contribution in the discovery of knowledge and the preservation of world civilization. Graduates of the Faculty of Islamic Studies are expected to advance their career in academia, research institutions, policy-making institutions, international consulting agency, diplomatic work, government sectors, and also international organizations.
You want freedom and comfort, and so do we. We provide the best facilities to help you become an active and innovative generation in all aspects of life, both academic and non-academic. You will always have enough space to grow, together. Time will always be your friend, because everything you need can be accessed whenever you want. Nothing can stop you, and the sky is the limit. We will grow continuously along the journey, helping you develop all of your intelligence, physically, mentally, and spiritually. By doing so, we will produce critical human beings, capable of making a positive impact on social, political, and cultural aspects of life in Muslim societies.
Yes, it's you.
An exciting journey, isn't it? Your journey to an international education will start in Depok City, a city with numerous natural resources, with huge potential and opportunity.
For all
waiting to
participants,
explore.
please kindly move forward and fill up the seats
Depok
at the front.
has everything you need to support you in your education journey. Get ready. It
Please,
is
if you
time
can
to
move
make your
forward,
own
it's
story.
really appreciated.
At the Faculty of Islamic Studies at UIII, we are ready to accompany you along this incredible journey.
Yeah, we are going to start soon. Please, for all participants, fill up the front seats. paham sih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed scholars, colleagues, and participants. Welcome back to the second day of the International Conference on Manuscripts and the Diversity of Islam in Southeast Asia. My name is Birawa Nuraga. It is once again my honor to serve as your Master of Ceremonies. Allow me to once again respectfully acknowledge our distinguished guests, Her Royal Highness the Tengku Ampuan of Pahang, Tunku Azizah Aminah Maimunah Iskandariah binti almarhum Sultan Iskandar Al-Hajj, and other honorary guests from Malaysia. We are deeply honored and, to be honest, surprised in positive way by Your Royal Highness' active engagement throughout this conference, particularly your attentiveness to the presentations, note-taking, and enthusiasm for academic discussion. So you have really inspired all of us. Thank you. And we are also honored by the presence of Professor Yanwar Pribadi, Dean of the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Dr. Saiful Umam, Director of Research and Community Engagement, our distinguished keynote speakers, presenters, chairs, colleagues, and participants. Thank you once again for joining us in this second day. Today's session brings together three distinguished scholars whose research offers diverse perspectives on the rich manuscript traditions, intellectual histories, and cultural encounters of Southeast Asia. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Mariam Konitat to chair the session. To Dr. Mariam, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you, the Honorable Rector of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, the Honorable Vice Rectors, and the Honorable Dean of the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Your Royal Highness Tengku Ampuan of Pahang, Tunku Azizah Aminah Maimunah Iskandariah binti almarhum Sultan Iskandar Al-Hajj, distinguished guests, respected keynote speakers, colleagues, and fellow participants, welcome to Day 2 of our international conference, Manuscripts and the Diversity of Islam in Southeast Asia, organized by the Center for Islamic Manuscripts and Written Cultures, Faculty of Islamic Studies, Universitas Islam International Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, today, I have the honor of chairing this morning's plenary session 2. On behalf of the organizing committee, allow me first to thank all of you for joining us again this morning, and to thank our three distinguished keynote speakers for their willingness to share their expertise with us today. Before we begin, let me briefly outline how this session will run. We have three keynote presentations, each allotted approximately 35 minutes, followed by a joint question and answer at the end, and we will conclude by approximately 12:30. And now, before we begin our presentation, allow me to invite our three distinguished keynote speakers to take their seats on stage. First, from the Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Professor Farish Anur, if round of applause. And second, from the British Library, United Kingdom, Dr. Annabel Tehgalop, and also the third from UIII Juraisio Lampung, Indonesia, Dr. Ervan Nurtawab. Let us welcome them with a round of applause. Okay. Our first speaker is Professor Farish Anur. I'm sorry. Because you said you. Okay. Okay. I thought, okay. It's just misunderstanding yesterday. Let's move to our first presentation. From our first speaker this morning is Dr. Annabel Tehgalop. She's head of the Southeast Asia section at the British Library, United Kingdom. And she joined the British Library in 1986 as curator for the Maritime Southeast Asia. And her research has since then been deeply rooted in the library's rich collection from the Malay world. Her recent works include the book Semesta, Karya S. Rukiah, 2024, and the monograph Malay Seals from the Islamic World of Southeast Asia, 2016, and several academic papers published between 2024 and 2025, focusing on Southeast Asian Islamic manuscript. And this morning, Ms. Galop will present on topic Quran manuscript from Southeast Asia in Netherlands. The floor is yours, Ms. Annabel. You have approximately 35 minutes ahead. Welcome. Please.
Yeah. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Good morning. I would like to first start by expressing my profound thanks to the organizers of this conference at UIII, Universitas Internasional Islam Indonesia, particularly to the rector, Pak Mahruf, and to all the organizers and the conveners, Pak Yanwa, Pak Mutsi, Pak Zaki. And it's also a particular honor to have Her Royal Highness Tengku Ampuan of Pahang present in the audience today. It's been a very stimulating and enriching conference so far. I have really enjoyed the papers I've heard, some really pioneering and original research that's going on, from which we can all benefit. So the theme of this conference is Manuscripts and the Diversities of Islams in Southeast Asia. And my paper today will deal with one of the building blocks of such a study, which is where and what and how many of these manuscripts there are, and in particular through my work on Quran manuscripts. So, in particular, I work on the art of the Quran, the material and physical attributes of Quran manuscripts. And this necessitates a periodic reappraisal and survey, both qualitative and quantitative, of Quran manuscripts. And one of the most exciting aspects of this field is that the number increases with every new survey. So when Dr. Ali Akbar completed his doctoral dissertation at UI in 2016 on Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts, a calligraphic study, he inventoried a total of 1,075 Quran manuscripts from Southeast Asia, with 663 being held in Indonesia and 412 in the rest of the world, of which the great majority, about 300, were held in Malaysia. However, this PhD dissertation was undertaken before the major digitization programs of the Endangered Archives Program from the British Library and DreamSea, as well as a large number of other catalogues and surveys and studies of Quran manuscripts which have since been taken. which in fact have brought to light many more manuscripts. I would now estimate that there are probably twice as many, so around 2,000 Quran manuscripts from Southeast Asia, of which about 90% are held in Southeast Asia itself, and primarily in Indonesia, of course, and also Malaysia, and about 10% in the rest of the world, with about 150 manuscripts in Europe and the remaining 50 in the Americas, Australia, and the Middle East. So what counts as a Quran manuscript? For this survey, how do I define Quran manuscripts? I used the criteria first established by Petrus Voorhoeven in his hand list of Arabic manuscripts in the Netherlands. So in scope are Quran manuscripts copied in Southeast Asia, which were created to contain the full Quranic text in a single volume, even if the manuscript is currently damaged and missing parts, most usually the beginning or the end of the volume, as is often the case. Also included in my survey and my statistics are single volumes containing part of the Quranic text, including both those created as part of a multi-volume Quran and those created to contain just a selections from the Quran, such as Juz Amma, for example. But what I have not included in my survey are manuscripts in Voorhoeven's third category, which were manuscripts containing part of the Quran within a larger volume containing other text. Out of scope also are printed Qurans, both lithographed and typeset. But although not part of our corpus, still of great interest for the light they can shed on networks of contact, trade, and influencers are manuscripts of the Quran created elsewhere in the Islamic world, but which were found in Southeast Asia. So on the basis of the above criteria, there are about 150 Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts known to be held in Europe, and a few observations can be made about this corpus. About 1/3 are from Java, and 1/3 are from Aceh. There are very small numbers from other parts of Southeast Asia, although quite a large proportion, almost another third, are of as yet undetermined regional provenance. When you encounter a Quran manuscript in Indonesia, in a particular region, like, for example, Aceh or Central Java or Jambi, one can have fairly good grounds for assuming that there's a high degree of probability that it was created reasonably locally, unless there are signs to the contrary. But when you encounter these Quran manuscripts outside Southeast Asia, it is very difficult to determine where they come from unless there are very clear codicological indications. So there's also, although there are about equal numbers from Java and Aceh, there's quite a distinct difference between their profile. The Qurans from Java, currently held in the Netherlands, were acquired steadily from the 17th century onwards right through to the early 20th century. And in fact, Qurans from Java account for the majority of early Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts known. However, all the Quran manuscripts from Aceh found in European collections, except for one, were acquired at a very late stage, directly as a consequence of the Dutch war on Aceh from 1873 onwards, when large numbers of Islamic manuscripts were captured. And it is thus Aceh war booty which accounts for the small numbers of Southeast Asian Qurans held in Belgium, Denmark, Portugal, and Austria. But it is also noteworthy that there are no Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts known to be held in any Eastern European country, including Russia, or in Spain. And it is not surprising to find that in Europe, by far the largest collection is held in the Netherlands. And that is what I will be talking about today. The starting point for any study of Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts in the Netherlands is Voorhoeven's Hand List of Arabic Manuscripts, published in 1980. This hand list was famously terse, usually giving only the shelf mark and catalogue reference. But Petrus Voorhoeve was such an extraordinary scholar that he was able to identify, just at a glance or from their collection history, which manuscripts were likely to come from Indonesia, and he very helpfully identified those as such in his hand list. So in Voorhoeven's hand list of 1980, there are 71 Qur'ans, of which 39 were single volume copies of the whole text, and 32 were volumes containing part of the Qur'an. Building on Voorhoeven's list and using other manuscript catalogues as well as information kindly supplied by others, the latest count of Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts in the Netherlands is 107 manuscripts, of which 58 are single-volume mushafs and 49 are manuscript volumes containing part of the Quran. And in addition, there are 8 Quran manuscripts copied elsewhere in the Islamic world, which were found in Indonesia. And so for my presentation today, I would like to highlight 10 of the most interesting and significant of these Quran manuscripts, some of which are already well known, but others which are newly identified. The first is indeed a very well-known manuscript, and with good reason. It is the oldest known securely dated Quran manuscript from Southeast Asia. It is datable because it was given to a Dutch admiral, Matlief, in 1606 as a gift by the Qadi or chief Islamic official of Johor. The Quran is written on Dluang with a colophon in Javanese, and was described in an article published in 2002 by Peter Riddell. Now, at the time of Riddell's article, the use of Javanese in the colophon of this Quran led to suggestions that the Quran may have been brought to Johor from Jambi or Palembang or another Sumatran court where Javanese was the court language. However, since with the advance in studies of Quran manuscripts since then, I believe that there are now no reasons not to assume that this Quran actually was copied in Java, was made in Java, and brought to Johor, from where it was then presented to the Dutch admiral. This is a complete Quran, and as you can see, it's still in very good condition. But a few years ago, I came across another Quran on Dluang in Leiden University Library, which had clearly been in European scholarly hands for a very long time, for it was interleaved and bound in a European parchment binding with annotations in a European hand. At least 4 previous owners could be identified from the late 17th century onwards, before it arrived in the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences in Amsterdam in the 19th century, and it is now held as part of the permanent loan collection in Leiden University Library. This manuscript is also complete, and it also has a colophon in Javanese. And in fact, the colophon and the hand of this manuscript is so similar to the Rotterdam Quran that it is probably of a similar age, and Ali Akbar believes it may even be by the same scribe, or at the very least from the same scriptorium. The third very early Quran manuscript I'd like to show and to highlight is a partial copy, also copied on Luang, of selected surahs of the Quran. This is another manuscript from the Academy collection in Leiden University Library. The combination of the codicological study of the Luang, the paleography of the handwriting, and the presence of annotations in the hand of the Danish scholar Willem Lehl, and radiocarbon dating analysis, all suggest a dating of around 1600, which would make this the earliest illuminated Southeast Asian Quran manuscript known. And just last year, I published an article on this in the Hamburg journal, Manuscript Cultures, which was stimulated by the opportunity, thanks to the kind collaboration of the conservator of Leiden University Library, Dr. Karin Scheper, to radiocarbon date 3 early De Luang manuscripts in Leiden University Library. The fourth manuscript to be presented is from a different part of Southeast Asia, from Ambon. It's from the late 17th century, and according to a note in the manuscript, it was copied in Manipa, the island of Manipa, off Ambon, in 1694 by Batu Langkai, the Imam of Tomilehu, and was checked by 4 other Imams. The Quran has a partial interlinear Malay translation and annotations in a European hand. Most remarkable is the illumination, because at the beginning it is in a strongly European influenced style, for example, reflecting the use of perspective. And this is one of the earliest Quran manuscripts from anywhere in the world with illumination in a European style at such an early date. But the illumination on the final pages is in a completely local idiom. One is tempted to say in a Malucan idiom, but of course we know so little about any comparative examples. There's really nothing else to compare it with. But there are some very, very interesting patterns and motifs in this Quran. Moving on now to the 18th century, this Quran manuscript is notable as probably the only Quran from the Malay Peninsula, present-day Malaysia, held in the Netherlands. Now in the Athenaeum Bibliotheek in Deventer, it was captured in Selangor in 1784 by the Dutch Admiral Jacob van Braam, shortly after the battle in which the famous Raja Haji of Riau was killed. This manuscript is one of 2 Quran manuscripts in the library belonging to the Panglima Besar of Selangor, Tengku Said Jafar, which was captured in this attack, and the 30 manuscripts from that collection are now held together in Deventer. Selangor was a Bugis sultanate, and this large and august Quran was created in the Bugis style, with its rich tradition of Quranic learning, with dense variant Qira'at readings annotated artistically in the margin. However, it is unfinished, and it was probably captured still in loose, unbound quires. At the moment in Deventer, it is in 2 parts. There's one bound volume and one section which is still completely loose. We know that it is unfinished because, for example, the pages in the bound volume, none of them have the Qira'at annotations, which so densely occupy the margins in the other part. But I've chosen to show this example because it's particularly interesting. I'm not sure whether you've got a pointer. No. Oh, yes. No, it doesn't work on the screen. But if you look, is there a pointer? No, so click backwards, go back. No, back. Can you do the pointer? Is it working? But I know, but it doesn't work on the screen. Okay. But I want you to look at the bottom left-hand page. 3 lines up is a correction to the manuscript. If you look closely, you will see that there is white, a bit like Tipex, underneath, and the text has been rewritten correctly on top. Now, as I said, this was an unfinished manuscript. When it was captured in Selangor in 1784, it probably consisted of a pile of loose pages, loose folios. What you can see is that when it was checked, the correction was written on the margin of the left-hand page vertically in very small letters. And this was an indication to the scribe to correct that particular part. If you can tell, the edges of the paper are what we call decal edges. It's been uncut. They are just the edges of the sheet of paper. This means that it was going to be bound, and when it was bound, it would have been trimmed, and that correction would have been cut off. So when it was completed, we would not see the evidence of where the correction had been made, which is now so clear in this manuscript. So there is a lot to be learned from this unfinished Quran about how it was made and corrected and the stages in which it was put together, perhaps with the collaboration of different hands. It was certainly originally planned to have 3 great double-decorated frames, at the beginning, at the end, and in the middle, at the beginning of Surat Al-Kahf. But sadly, we will never know what the illumination would have looked like, because this Quran was never completed before it was captured in 1784. The second Quran in the library of Selangor, belonging to the Panglima Besar, which is now held in Deventer, is a Quran from Aceh. It is intriguing because it is certainly an Achenese Quran, identified through the style, the calligraphy, the text divisions. And because it was captured in 1784, it is the earliest datable Aceh Quran, because Aceh Qurans almost never have colophons. But the style of illumination is quite different from the hundreds of illuminated Qurans found in Aceh today. And this manuscript might be an important clue towards establishing the date of evolution of the standard Achenese style of illumination. So now to show you a very typical Achenese Quran, and this is the same one that I think Andrew chose to show yesterday. It is in Leiden University Library, and it is a very poignant Quran. It is well known because, according to the donation register of Leiden University Library, it was captured after the Dutch invasion of 1873, and it was taken by a Dutch officer from beside the body of a dead priest, an imam, in the mosque in Aceh Besar, the Groot Aceh, Greater Aceh. So this is a very typical style of Achenese illumination, and most Aceh manuscripts follow the same principles of design and color as this one. But in the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam, there is a single folio, only one page, one folio, from a Quran which I think might have been one of the finest Achenese Qurans ever seen if it had survived. Because this is just a single page with an illuminated roundel, and we certainly recognize the origin of this, or the influences which created this. It's in the Shamsa, or sunburst roundel, in the Indo-Persian tradition, which you normally find at the beginning of great manuscripts, often with the name of the patron or the owner of the manuscript. And in this manuscript from Aceh, we see it bears the name of the owner, and the name of the owner is Tuan Abdul Rahman of Lambadar, so he's the patron who commissioned the manuscript, and the name of the scribe, Tuan Lebay Jamaluddin, also of Lambadar in Aceh. Finally, I would like to turn to the collections of Utrecht University Library, which holds a small but important collection of 5 Indonesian Quran manuscripts. This is a very unusual and very beautiful Javanese Quran, which was originally created as a 15-volume set, with each volume containing 2 juz. Only 4 of these volumes survive, but they all have these very fine, beautiful, double decorated frames at the beginning in a recognizably Javanese, and I would say probably Central Javanese style. So it's very, very unusual in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, to find Quran manuscripts which were created in more than one volume. Probably the number of examples is not more than 10 or 15. The great Library of Banten, which Andrew spoke about and Ervan will also speak about, has quite a number of multi-volume Quran. So it was clearly a feature of the Banten court. But apart from that, there are very, very few. A couple of Qurans from Sulawesi created in 2 volumes, and a few manuscripts, smaller manuscripts, plainer ones, copied in 30 volumes with 1 juz each. But it's quite rare to find a grand illuminated Quran in more than 1 volume. At the end of one of these 4 volumes, there are also there's an illuminated tailpiece. But the last Quran, Indonesian Quran to consider, also in Utrecht University Library, has an unusual history. It was presented in 1749 by Swellengrebel, who was the governor of the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa. And this governor, Swellengrebel, had been born in the Cape of Good Hope, and he never went to Southeast Asia. So that means that this Quran, which is in a recognizably Javanese hand and style, was either brought from Java to South Africa or copied in South Africa by a Javanese scholar or imam. This is the last Southeast Asian Quran I wanted to discuss today, but its hybrid history illustrates the importance of studying the fringes of the tradition in order to understand directional influences. And so that is why I have now started to pay more attention to Quran manuscripts from other Islamic lands which are documented as having been found in Southeast Asia. So when I started my study of Quran manuscripts about 20 years ago, in Malaysia or Indonesia, sometimes I would come across an recognizably Ottoman or Indian Quran, and I would just say, oh, it's Ottoman. Oh, it's not a local Quran, and I didn't pay any attention. But now I realize it's very important to be aware of these manuscripts because it is their presence which might have influenced local practices in various ways. So this is a Quran from India, now in Rotterdam in the Wereld Museum, which was found in Aceh. So it's very easily identified as being from India from a number of features. For example, the illuminated arches at top and bottom are bisected by the gutter of the book. This is a feature you find in many Indian Qurans from Kashmir downwards, but you never find this arrangement of arches in Southeast Asia. The word Allah is always written in red. This is a very Indian feature, although it's also found in Banten and in a number of other 18th century Qurans from Indonesia. But another specifically Indian feature is on the ordinary text pages, there is a second text frame around the outer edges of the page. And this is a very Indian feature, which is not common in Southeast Asia. But this Quran was found in Aceh. But perhaps most interesting of all is this Quran, this manuscript, which I was only sent pictures of 2 months ago, by a curator at the Zeus, I don't know how to pronounce this, the Zeus Museum in Middelburg in the Netherlands. When I saw the pictures of the scroll and I was asked my opinion, I just said dismissively, oh, no, it's nothing to do with Southeast Asia, it's either Ottoman or Indian. It's a miniature Quran, the entire Quran written in scroll format in this decorative Gubar script, and you can see some of the patterns. There are beautiful floral patterns. The script makes patterns throughout the whole scroll. But the most interesting fact is that according to the documentation in the museum, the provenance information, it was presented to the museum in 1790 by Adriaan Moon, the Governor General in Batavia, who explained that rolled up and stored in the copper case, which you can still see. It was worn around the bare arm by local Moorish kings. So this was obviously a very powerful and protective source of protective power to wear the complete Quran on the arm, presumably while going to battle. Unfortunately, there is no more information on which Indonesian Islamic king it was taken from, but it is extraordinarily interesting to know that such Quran manuscripts were used in Indonesia, were present in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, and were used for such purposes. I mentioned that printed Qurans were out of scope in this survey of Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts in the Netherlands, such as this very fine lithographed Quran from Singapore, decorated in the Terengganu style, which was found in Aceh and is now in the Netherlands. However, I think we need to remind ourselves that the distinction between manuscript and print is an arcane technical bibliographic distinction which would not have mattered to the owner of the holy book, either for this Quran or the much more common multiple copies of Qurans printed in Bombay with their distinctive huruf tebal, thick letters, which you find all over Southeast Asia, from Aceh to Java to Mindanao. And also note the leather covers, which are very distinctive, and these covers are often reused in Indonesia, used for other manuscripts, sometimes even divided into two and folded in half to put around smaller manuscripts. So all I've done today is to give a survey of the Southeast Asian Quran manuscripts found in the Netherlands. Only very, very few, no more than a handful, have been studied or published. The others are almost completely unknown. And so I do hope that with the newly established Center for the Study of Manuscripts and Written Cultures here at UIII, that many scholars here and many students here will take forward the study of these manuscripts. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, thank you, Ms. Annabelle. You have shown us that these manuscripts are not just texts, they are witness, each carrying the artistic fingerprint of its origin, like you mentioned. Every region has its characteristic, and each telling a story of how the Quran was honored across this archipelago long time ago. So now let's proceed to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Professor Farish Anur, a distinguished professor of history specializing in Southeast Asian studies and colonial history at our Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Islam International Indonesia. And also, Professor Farish holds a PhD in political science from the University of Essex, and his academic career has spanned prestigious institutions across Europe and Asia, including Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and Frederick Alexander University, Germany. He's a prolific author known for his critical essays on colonialism, Orientalism, and political movement in Southeast Asia, and his work bridged academia and public discourse through numerous publications, podcasts, and lectures delivered worldwide. Today, Professor Farish's presentation is titled "When the Other is Civilized, Theodore de Bry's Framing of Banten as a Non-Western Polity." Professor Farish, the floor is yours, and you have approximately 35 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'll try my best to dovetail what Annabelle's talked about, and in anticipation of what Irwan will be talking about, which will be about Qurans in Banten. This is veering a bit from the trajectory of this conference and the topics that we've been discussing, I want to raise one simple question, which has to do with the positioning of Islam, not in the geographical sense, but in the epistemic sense of where and how was Islam seen and understood in the context of the 17th century. And I believe just now, Annabelle, you talked about the earliest Qurans that we have in Europe, and of course later on the Qurans from Aceh that are part of the war booty of the 19th century. One of the questions we need to ask was, why were Qurans deemed collectible in the 19th century? Why were they regarded as war booty? And why were other things, other texts, other forms of cultural praxis not even studied? And so this is an attempt to actually bring two discourses into conversation. One, what we've been doing over the last 2 days, which is a discussion of Islam, Muslim normative religiosity, texts and what have you. And two, how all of this was seen from a Western perspective in the 17th century. I'm basically a historian of 19th century colonial Southeast Asia, so I'm going a bit further back in time from where I normally reside. But I want to take us back to what I think is an interesting text that attempted to somehow understand and depict to Europeans what a Muslim polity looked like in the early 17th century. The text I'm going to be looking at is actually the work produced by the sons of Theodore de Brie, Johann Theodorus de Brie and Johann Israel de Brie, that was published in Frankfurt in 1701. But even before that, the starting point would be, I think, Anthony Grafton's very important book, New World's Ancient Texts. In that book, Grafton talks about how the encounter with the American continent raised deep philosophical questions among Europeans for whom the American continent was not even mentioned in scripture. So how do you reconcile modern navigation with traditional knowledge, and what the encounter with America meant and how it shaped the way in which Europeans began to view the other? The point I want to put across here is that in the case of the encounter between Europeans and Muslims in Southeast Asia, the challenge for Europeans then was how to depict another culture, another civilization that was civilized but not European. And of course, all of this predates the book. Here's a leaf from Sebastian Munster's Cosmographia, 1598. If you look at the depictions, of course, we are all familiar with this, the way in which early encounters, early depictions of Asia and Africa from a Western perspective tended to be evidently, obviously, Eurocentric. The two cities you see up there, that's not Strasbourg, that's actually Tenasserim, and at the bottom is Pegu in Burma. So these are early European imaginings of what this other exotic East looks like, and it can only be framed from a Western perspective, which is understandable at that time. But what's interesting about Munster's account of Tenasserim and Pegu in 1598 is that because these are Buddhist societies, the framing of Buddhism and Buddhists was, in a sense, typical of the sort of Eurocentric bias at the time. There's an emphasis on the exotic, there's an emphasis on otherness. They are not us. And this takes off from Grafton's argument in his work. The encounter with South America, the encounter with Native Americans, presented Europeans with a shock of discovery. Because up till then, the oldest and closest civilizational neighbor to Europe was the Arab-Muslim world. That's the other the other at your doorstep. The discovery of Native Americans suddenly provides Europeans, particularly the Spanish and Portuguese, but later also the English and the rest, a new set of rules on how to describe the other in terms that are, well, by today's standards, caricatural. The Native American is cannibal, the Native American is savage, and what have you. How do you do that? How do you maintain that when you encounter other cultures and societies that are evidently not savage, not primitive? And in fact, not only as developed as you, but perhaps even more so. And that's the challenge, I suppose, that was faced by the Debris brothers when they wrote an account of Banten, published in 1601. This is the work by Johann Theodor and Johann Israel Debris, both of whom were the sons of Theodorus Debris, who was a Protestant refugee, in fact, in the prelude to the religious wars happening in Europe. And Grafton makes a very interesting point in his work. If you compare the way in which the Debris brothers depicted South America, we come across recurrent images of savagery and barbarism. But a shift, a very visible shift happens when they write an account of Banten. And this account of Banten is based on the narrative of Jan Huygen van Lichthofen, who was, of course, at that time a famous Dutch adventurer who is notorious for his role in actually stealing and copying Portuguese navigational maps in Goa, and thereby giving the Dutch passage to Banten. So this work is published in 1601 in Frankfurt. And it's an interesting year, 1601. 1601, Mehmed III is at war with the Austrians. 1601, you have the Battle of Banten. The Battle of Banten was not a battle between Europeans and the Bantenese. It's actually a battle between the Dutch and the Portuguese, because this is a period of intense economic rivalry. Jan Huygen, of course, was not a religious scholar. He was not a philologist. He was not a collector of religious texts or what have you. He was an adventurer. He was a mercenary adventurer working in the pay of Dutch merchants who wrote an account of his stay in Banten, his travels from Madagascar to Sumatra to Banten. And the depiction of Banten, which I will be looking at today, I find interesting because these are among the first images of Southeast Asia that were made for wider public circulation at the time. So the Debris brothers begin their texts valorizing the new science of modern navigation, and I'll quote here. And although many generous and heroic deeds were performed in ancient times by various peoples in various places, among them all none is so sublime or worthy of such great commemoration as the art of navigation. And navigation is the new science. It's the hot new science that everyone wants to learn, and it's navigation that brings you to Banten. This text is interesting. This is my copy, by the way. There are many different versions of it, but in the version that I have, it comes in 2 volumes. One that is basically the entire narrative account by Van Huygen, and another smaller, slimmer volume has excerpts from Van Huygen's narrative, interspersed with or mixed with images, including maps. And it's the visualization of Muslims in Banten that I want us to look at. Because like I said, this is an attempt by Europe to somehow explain how and why are these people so developed, right? So what's interesting about the text is how the Debris brothers, quoting liberally from Van Huygen's text, provides their European readers. Remember, this is published in 1601 in Frankfurt, with some of the earliest images of life in the East Indies and how developed this society was. So here we have an image of a wedding in Banten. You'll notice, of course, some of these tropes and cliches will be repeated again and again and again throughout the 17th century. Everyone's wearing a turban. The turban is symbolic. It means you're a Muslim, right? The life of political life in Banten. This is an image of the king. And of course, what I find interesting is really how they try to capture the cosmopolitan life, the diversity that existed in Banten at the time. And so the text comes with these images of all kinds of merchants merchant communities that were already in Banten at a time when, remember, Europe is 10 years away from the 30-Year War. Yeah, 1601, it's 17 years away from the 30-Year War, but also at a time when European society was comparatively far more homogeneous. The brothers try to depict the different communities: Arabs, Persians, Indians, Klings, Africans, Abyssinians are mentioned again and again in the text, Burmese, Thais, and of course Chinese, as we see here. And modes of native worship that include both Muslim and non-Muslim worship. I'll get back to this later on. What I find interesting is also the way in which, based on Voinhuigen's narrative, the Debris brothers try to explain and describe to their European readers how political life was, how political activity was conducted in Banten at the time. And this is what I'm trying to get at. There is an attempt to recognize and understand and explain how there could be such a thing as a working polity. Banten as a functioning port city, but also as a functioning kingdom that somehow was modern, working as a polity, but was not Christian at the same time. We have various accounts, of course, of the kind of maritime trade that was there, and later on in the text there's a lot of stuff about the kind of ships and maritime technology that was found in Banten at the time. So let me backtrack and highlight a few things here. Like I said, Voinhuigen is not a religious scholar. He's not here to study Islam. He's a merchant. He's a Dutch merchant at the time when the Dutch and the Portuguese were bitter rivals in Southeast Asia. This is the beginning of Holland's attempts to draw a wedge and to find a foothold in Southeast Asia. And as we know, the Dutch would eventually take over Malacca from the Portuguese as well. But while doing this, he was clearly in admiration of the economic activity. I mean, he's a merchant, so he's more interested in the economic activity that he discovered, he found when he was in Banten at the time. And the text talks about the kinds of market culture that already existed. I'll quote here from chapter 23. Every day in Banten, a threefold market is established for displaying and selling goods of every kind. First, in a spacious area facing east, merchants of various nations, such as Portuguese, Arabs, Turks, Chinese, Klings, Paguans, Burmese from Pagu, Malays, Bengalis, Gujaratis, Malabaris, Abyssinians, Ethiopians, and other Indians. What we have here is an account of commercial activity that is actually plural and cosmopolitan at the same time. He talks about how different currencies somehow have to be, made comparable with one another because everyone's bringing in different currencies from different parts of the world. And how do you actually conduct trade in a place like Banten when basically the whole of Asia is there? Now, because he's a merchant, he focuses mainly on the mercantile activities there, but obviously Banten was a Muslim polity. And here is where I find Voinhuigen's text interesting, because he distinguishes between three things. There is Islam, and it's the positionality of Islam that I'm interested in. Where does he locate Islam from his Eurocentric universe? And then there are Muslims, and then there are Asians. He returns to the subject of Islam and Muslims again and again in chapter 24. In Java itself, as well as along the entire coastal region, the Mohammedan Islamic religion spreads. But in the inland regions of the land, there are pagans who hold the teachings of Pythagoras as valid. When writing about Muslims, he talks about their worship of Muhammad, in whose Quran they most obstinately believe. They recognize at least 4 prophets: Moses, David, Jesus, and Muhammad. In their mosques, they perform their worship or religion with silence and singular devotion, directing their faces towards the sun or the east, Qibla, and prostrating themselves repeatedly to the ground. In the manner of monks, they frequently read their canonical hours, which may not be omitted without permission. They observe 2 fasts or Lents in a single year. They celebrate the festival, eat with all their slaves and servants, sitting together in a single circle like tailors, and feasting together on the ground. Now, it's very interesting that he has this general understanding of Islam and Muslim religious life at the time. But of course, like I said, he's not a scholar, so he doesn't attempt to translate the Quran or what have you, but he observes religious behavior among Muslims as a whole. However, his understanding of Muslims is also then segregated and brought down to particulars, because among Muslims, a general abstract category, there are different ethnic groups. And this is where then the merchant in Van Huygen comes out, and the way he depicts the different communities in Banten at the time is very much guided by his own proclivities and his biases as a Dutch merchant trying to get the best deal that he can. So when he talks about the Javanese, not surprisingly, these are the merchants he has to deal with all the time, and he's not very complimentary when it comes to the Javanese. So I'm going to quote Van Huygen here. Any complaints, please send to Van Huygen, not to me. The Javanese are almost all stubborn, treacherous, malicious, and cruel by nature. As victors, they rage savagely. In committing thefts, they are so skilled that they surpass all other nations. Yet as soldiers, they are industrious and undaunted, and though ill-suited for the use of artillery and muskets. Indeed, if they knew how to use them, no force could subdue them. Their weapons are flame-shaped spears, pikes, daggers, krisses, and sabers and cutlasses. Their shields are either wooden or glued together from multiple layers of leather. They also wear breastplates made of iron plates, linked and joined together in rings, as can be seen in the illustrations, etc., etc. The native merchants are exceptionally shrewd, deceitful, ingenious, and treacherous, especially towards foreigners and newcomers. Among themselves, however, they act somewhat faithfully. So there's the Muslim and there's the Javanese. The Muslim is like us. They have a valid belief system. They have a religion. But as merchants, we can't trust these Javanese. It's actually interesting how then he breaks down the different Muslim merchant communities that he found in Banten at the time. Because while you have then the cunning, wily Javanese, he actually speaks very highly of Persians. This is what he says about Persians. Persians, called Khorasanis in Java, earn their living either through gem dealing or medicine. They are wise and amiable men with whom business can be conducted fairly and peacefully. They favor strangers and travelers immensely, surpassing all other nations trading there in courtesy and politeness. So I find this interesting. Later on, he talks about Arabs, he talks about Burmese, he talks about Malays, he talks about Klings. So you have this broad category of Islam and Muslims, but within that broad category are distinct ethnic groups, all of whom happen to share the same religion, but who behave, whose manners and customs differ wildly along ethnic lines, ethno-cultural lines. So the way in which he views Islam is, I think, in some ways, far more open-minded compared to the sort of stuff that would be produced much later. Like I said, much of my work is actually 19th century colonial Southeast Asia. And all of this is written 200, 300 years before the advent of modern racialized colonial capitalism, where by the 18th and 19th century, Islam has become increasingly solidified and frozen in the Western gaze and framed often in terms of dialectical opposition. Earlier, Annabelle talked about the Qurans that were taken as war booty during the Aceh War, the Dutch intervention in the Padri Wars, America's intervention in Sumatra in the bombing of Kuala Batu. All these incidents, by the 19th century, you have a relatively fixed and frozen idea of what Islam is and what Muslims are. What I'm trying to show here is that here in the early 17th century, this understanding of Islam was a bit more fluid, that there is a distinction between Islam and Muslims, and that Muslims are actually differentiated along cultural, ethno-religious, racial lines, and I'm sorry if this sounds like a cliche, they are actually good Muslims and bad Muslims. Primarily because there are some good merchants and there are bad merchants. That's the criteria. You know, who can facilitate trade, who will trade with us, and those are the ones that we can deal with. Jan Huyten also wrote a lot about how Banten was governed at the time. And what I find interesting about this, again, to go back to the point earlier raised by Anthony Grafton, this comes at a time when Europe is expanding beyond its borders and encountering the other. Grafton argues that the encounter with the American continent sent shockwaves across Europe because you are now having to deal with a cultural other that is evidently, clearly alien to yourself. Arriving in Banten at the time, via Sumatra, by the way, and via Madagascar, Jan Huyten looks at the way in which Banten society was governed and how governance and law were administered. In chapter 32, he talks about the kinds of assemblies that are held in Banten. This is a long quote, but I think it's worth it if I were to read it in whole. So he talks about, this is how legal disputes were handled in Banten when Banten was a Muslim sultanate. This is Van Huygen. In Banten, they hold public assemblies, and here you see the public assembly. In Banten, they hold public assemblies regarding private matters in the square. At the time when the intense heat of the sun has cooled down, anyone who wishes can gather there. If they have legal disputes, they must appear in person, state their case, and refute their adversary. Therefore, in that place, attorneys or lawyers can hope for no profit. Nor are cases accustomed to be dragged out for a long time among them. Public matters and those concerning the state are decided at nightfall by the light of the moon. They are driven to this custom by an ancient superstition brought, as it was said, from Persia. So much so that even today, under the appearance of a new moon, they climb onto the roofs of their houses and tops of trees, gazing intently at the moon with a persistent look. Rejoicing at this spectacle, they remain sitting in the Senate until the moon sets again. Afterwards, having separated, each returns to his home, and while certain prepared dishes are served, he makes merry, sleeping with one of his wives. From noon onward, they have gathered again. They hear the cases of those who are proposed to them publicly in the Senate the following day. When gathered and assemble again, they all sit down on the ground, and in the middle of two or four chief men sitting in a single row, the king or governor places himself, who proposes the necessary cases to the rest and requests their deliberation on how and by what means they should proceed. In hearing the responses, they go from the highest to the lowest, and having gathered the opinions of each, what needs to be done is finally decided. If the matter involves war, a meeting is summoned by all the captains, who number 300, and for all the rest, the populace is divided among them. Now, what's interesting about this is, what do we call this? How do we label this? In the text, the Debris brothers point out that when these assemblies are called for, the king presides along with the aristocracy and the religious leaders of the community, but every other community in Banten is also present. The Arabs are there, the Persians are there, the Malays are there, the Klings are there, the Abyssinians, Ethiopians are there. The one condition is that they are all Muslim. They are all Muslim. So here we have something which I believe that even in Europe did not exist. The idea then that in this cosmopolitan, plural, Muslim, mercantile polity, matters of state and matters of related to commerce, law, legal disputes are actually discussed in a public forum where all communities are represented and have a voice, almost all of them. And again, this brings us back to the question I raised earlier. How is Islam being situated here? How is it presented? How is it understood? Because on the one hand, Islam is the other. But the other that we have here is a liminal one. The positionality of Islam that we get in Debris' work is one which locates Islam within more or less the same Abrahamic tradition as a religion, but a religion that is not obviously Christian, but part of that tradition. I mean, the mention earlier of the recognition of prophets, Abraham, David, Jesus, and what have you, again somehow connects Islam, brings it within but not inside the economy of the known and the familiar. Now, if you want the unfamiliar, then you have the evident other, which is the Chinese. In Jan Huygens' text, and this is reproduced in the brief's work, we see varying degrees of otherness, where Muslims are not European, obviously. They are Arabs, Persians, Malays, Javanese, and what have you, but they're not entirely outside or beyond the pale of the known and knowable, because they have a religion, and that religion is somehow connected to and part of that Abrahamic tradition. And then there are those who are completely beyond the pale, notably Chinese. Chinese loom large in Van Huygens' text, because when he talks about them, there is this air of incomprehension, incredulity. I do not know what this is. And the depiction of the Chinese in Banten is perhaps the closest to the ones done by the Debris brothers when depicting Native Americans in their accounts of the American continent. There's a section here, which I believe actually is the stuff of fiction, because I've never seen anything like this, but I'm going to quote from the text. This is when Jan Huygens talks about Chinese beliefs that he claims he witnessed in Banten, and basically he describes it as devil worship. I'm quoting here. Although the Chinese indeed believe that God is one who created all things and founded them out of nothing, they nonetheless venerate the devil with worship and adoration. They have him depicted and represented in their temples and shrines, sitting in an elevated yet dark, gloomy place, his head encircled with 3 crowns bearing huge horns, terrifying and dreadful, with an awesome countenance, sticking out claws in place of feet and hands. They bow down on their faces and strike the ground several times, knocking over their heads. Having completed this, whenever they happen to have brought with them, whatever they have brought with them, whether fruit or either other items, they offer upon the altar to him, dedicate it, and place it at its feet. When we asked them why they adored an evil demon and offered those gifts to him while the true God was spurned and neglected, they answered that no offering was needed to appease God, since he is by his nature optimal and harmless. But as for why they perform sacred rites to the devil, this was done by them so that, since he is a greater spirit and ingenious at doing harm, he would not attempt any injury against them. So you have an account here, and honestly, this is an early fantastic account. That's the only way I can describe it. It is a fantastic account of Chinese beliefs that for Jan Huygens, and also for the Debris brothers, and presumably their European readership at the time, was beyond the pale of the known and knowable or recognizable. What I find interesting about this text, this work by the Debris brothers, like I said, is it's one of the earliest attempts by Europeans to imagine life in Southeast Asia, in the East Indies, by focusing on a polity that was clearly already developed. Not only was Banten developed, it was clearly also a multicultural plural space, with different ethnic groups, different merchant communities living and working together. It had developed a means of governing itself. It had developed mechanisms by which legal disputes, political disputes could be settled, i.e. via consensus and discussion. But all of this was done on a register that was not European Christian. So in terms of the positionality of Islam and Muslims, where do we locate Islam? Jan Huygens was writing, and the Debris brothers were publishing at the time, long before the Dutch and later the British and French would establish a permanent foothold in Southeast Asia. Like I said, Jan Huygens was not a religious scholar. Whatever understanding he may have about Islam was largely superficial, based on observation, and I personally feel that, what he wrote about Chinese beliefs were probably way off the mark, because I've never seen anything remotely similar to that when looking at Chinese religious practice in Southeast Asia today. Nonetheless, we see how in this text and in the images that accompany the text, there is an attempt to do 2 things. One, present to the European readership a view of Islam. This is it. This is what Islam looks like, and this is what Muslims look like. And at the same time, also present the East, Southeast Asia, Banten, to a European audience. Now remember, Banten would loom very large in the European imaginary more than 100 years after this. If those of you are familiar with Henry Fielding, his short story here, the author's farce, where the term, the King of Banten, would become a popular term in common usage in England to denote someone extremely rich, basically the Jeff Bezos of the time, right? So to be called the King of Banten in the 18th century meant being extraordinarily rich in the context of England. So Banten would loom large over the next 200 years, from 1601 all the way up to throughout the 17th, 18th, and up to the 19th century. And I think what will happen is with later Dutch penetration and finally settlement, control and conquest of Java, this perception, this early complex perception of Javanese life, Bantenese life, Banten itself as a polity, would experience shifts. The events of the 19th century, once we get to the Java War of 1825-1830, we get to the Padri War of 1803-1837, then we get to the Aceh War that begins in 1873. All these events, these cumulative events, would increasingly solidify and frame how Europeans, in particular the Dutch, would come to view Islam in Southeast Asia and what being Muslim meant. The positionality of Islam therefore moves. It shifts and changes over time due to reasons that have perhaps nothing to do with Islam itself, but rather how Islam is positioned, how Muslims are positioned in the wider geopolitical calculations that accompany the advance of modern racialized colonial capitalism. But this is an early view of Islam. It's an early view of a Muslim polity coming at the time long before what we now call modern racial science theory, long before the emergence of modern eugenics, long before you have this the notion of the white man's burden and what have you. This is an early European encounter with Southeast Asia. This is an early European encounter with Muslim politics and a Muslim polity coming at a time not when Europeans were not arriving with prejudices of their own, but I think also without preconceived notions of fixed understanding of what Islam should look like and what it is and what it ought to be. So in this early encounter, I would argue, and I'll end with this, taking off from Grafton's point, these early encounters, I think, are very important for us. They're important for us because they help explain later on why, for instance, in the centuries to come, they would increasingly develop an interest in Islam, in understanding Muslim thought, in understanding Muslim writing. Why, for instance, in maritime Southeast Asia, Qur'ans were collected, but other religious texts of other religious traditions were perhaps not regarded as important or worthy of examination and worthy of scholarship. My colleague Paul Hedges and I have written about this when we talked about the way in which in the 19th century, the positioning of Islam as a religion understood in the Western sense of what a religion should look like was accompanied by also a hierarchy of non-religions, non-Abrahamic beliefs that were not quite religious as religion was understood in the 19th century. It all starts with this. It starts with this early grappling encounter even before Holland would emerge as a major colonial power, but a combination of, on the one hand, genuine curiosity, political and economic ambition, and in some instances also stated and sometimes unstated disgust when encountering radical difference before them. So this very weird period before these understandings become sedimented, I think, need to be studied further as well, because they provide us perhaps with this context from which a lot of the work that we do now, is based upon. How and why was scholarship on Islam. How and why did Islamic studies emerge as a Western discipline, right? How and why it emerged in the first place can be traced back to this first encounter with the other who is civilized but still not us. End with that. Thank you.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Professor Faris, for this great presentation and also powerful lens how the Bryce brothers portray Banten at the earliest 16th century. Of course, this is back to the question that Professor Faris asked in the final words. But let's move first to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Ervan Nurtawab. He teaches religious studies at UIII Jurai Siwa Lampung, Indonesia. He is an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow 2022 to 2026 at FIS University of Freiburg, Germany. As I know, this is a very prestigious fellowship, Doctor. And also, he also a research fellow at the Institute of Asian, African, and Middle Eastern Studies, Sophia University, Japan. And Dr. Ervan completed his PhD from Monash University in 2018. For his doctoral project, Dr. Ervan studied practice of Tafsir al-Jalalain, learning in different pedagogical settings in the Indonesian Islamic public sphere. And today, this morning, Dr. Nurtawab will present on textual criticism to understand the genealogy of three Qurans from the 18th century Banten. Dr. Nurtawab, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Mariam Koniter, for your kind introductions. And I would like to also thank Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Pak Rektor, Pak Jamhari, Pak Amsal Bakhtiar, Pak Saiful Umam, Pak Yanwar, Pak Zaki, Pak Muzi, for these invitations. Dan juga yang saya hormati Her Royal Highness, the Tengku Ampuan of Pahang, Tunku Azizah Aminah Maimunah Iskandariyah binti Almarhum Sultan Iskandar Al-Hajj. I'm so honored to be here that I can learn from many of you regarding the current research project in the area of Southeast Asian Islamic studies. My presentation today is about the textual criticism to understand the regional Quranic manuscript from 18th century Banten. The preservation of the Quran has been a key priority ever since Islam emerged in early 7th century Arabia. The importance of both Quran recitation and the oral transmission of the scripture was established by the first generation of Muslims, and as a consequence, the following generation have been comfortable with memorization as a means of both transmitting and preserving the holy text. In addition to the being preserved in the memories of the believers, the Quranic text was also recorded in written form from the time of its revelations. Traditional historical accounts relate how the revealed words of God were documented in writing during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although it was not until a few years following the death of the Prophet that the Quran revelations were first gathered together and compiled to form of what we can understood as a book in the time of the first Rashidun Caliph Abu Bakr. And then the standardization of the Quran during the reign of the third Rashidun Caliph Utsman bin Affan, however, constitutes the most comprehensive canonization process, and the written codex of the Quran, the so-called Mushaf, or in plural Masahif, that emerged from this process as the result of Caliph Utsman project is still to the present day referred to as the Utsmani Codex or Rosam al-Utsmani. During the Umayyad and the early Abbasid period, there is another significant development in Quran's history as Arabic orthography became more established and the reading system or qira'at were canonized according to transmission representing the main reading traditions in a number of major Islamic cities. And then the final step in the standardization of the Quran took place during the 1920s when the Egyptian king, when the Egyptian king Fuad I assembled scholars from Al-Azhar University to work on the Royal Cairo edition of the Quran, which adopted only one reading system, that is the reading of Asim transmitted by Hafiz and the Quran numbering system. When talking about the genealogy of text, we are by default constructed to take the oldest writing as the most authentic codex, and then we would take this oldest writing as the norm to see the later copies. The questions are, does it really apply to the copying of the Quran? And do we need to revisit these assumptions when trying to understand the genealogy of the regional Quranic codex? In the context of Southeast Asia, thanks to Dr. Annabel Gallop and Dr. Ali Akbar, who have greatly contributed to the understanding of regional Quranic codex through their publication within the last 25 years in respect of illuminations, decorations, and Arabic calligraphy. Since a long time ago, I have been thinking about proposing a new approach by which we are also able to identify a connection of one Quran copy to another by critically looking at text and its relevant features that are normally found in the Quranic copies. In this regard, I propose three things found in the Quranic manuscript to serve textual criticism for the production of the Quran from a specific region. That is first divisions, first numbering system, and Quranic readings or qira'at. In this presentation, I would like to discuss both first division and first numbering system together. First of all, if we look at a Quranic copy, we can identify first division is an important element of the Quranic text. The placement of first divisions is an issue that can be traced back to the earliest fragments of the Quranic materials known to us. So this is just an example of a very old Quranic copy from early Islamic period. The Muslim traditions also record that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ always paused his recitation at the end of a verse and stopped after every 10 verses. Nevertheless, the Islamic tradition has just established a number of verse counting systems in the late first century of Islamic Hijri by identifying them based on oral transmissions that represent a number of major urban settlements during the early Islamic period. Medina, Mecca, Basra, Damascus, and Kufan. Actually, there are still so many counting traditions at the time, but at least there are 6 Muqtabarah traditions of first numbering system that exists until today. In addition to Al-Hims, after the city of Homs in Syria. The 6 recognized traditions for the first numbering system are therefore Medina I and Medina II, because the city was home to 2 counting traditions, Meccan, Basran, Damascus, and Kufa. If we look at this counting system, we can see that the Basran counting system is the lowest number, has the lowest number, and the Kufan system that we are very familiar with it has the highest number of first Quranic verses. Actually, when I was child, my teacher always told me that Al-Quran has 6,666 verses. When I went home, I counted again at the time when I was child, and the total number never ever achieved 6,666, and I don't know where this number come from. Yeah. There is an evidence of a preference among the Muslim communities for specific verse numbering system following the Masahif project initiated by the Umayyad governor at the time Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf in the late first Islamic Hijri or in the early 8th century. During the fourth Rashidun Caliphate, Medina, of course, remained the center of Islamic polity, and the early Medinan tradition developed as the norm for Quranic textual transmissions. But at the time, there was a kind of awareness about the first counting system. Following that, the Islamic imperia tended to endorse certain first numbering system over others. Thus, in the early Umayyad period, Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf, that I already mentioned this name, for example, initiated the production of Qur'ans intended to replace the version produced by the Caliph Uthman. To implement this, he referred to the Mushaf al-Imam acquired from Uthman family, but he assembled a team consisting of only Basran scholars to carry out the project, leading to a situation where the Umayyad Imperium at the time promoted the Basran first numbering tradition. Then the Abbasid dynasty overthrew the Umayyad dynasty and ruled for about 5 centuries until the middle of the 13th century. In the early period of this dynasty, which is in the period of in the middle of 8th century, more space was provided for groups of scholars in Kufa. Of course, the Kufa was at the time the city where the Umayyad rulers met with the strongest oppositions to have more active engagement in the development of Islamic scholarship, including the Quran copying traditions. Therefore, the Kufan reading traditions became dominant in the textual transmission of the Quran during the Abbasid era, and it went on to become even more established during the Ottoman period. The worldwide use of the Kufan reading tradition, which applies the reading of Asim transmitted by Hafiz, then became a consideration for Al-Azhar University scholars during the 1920s initiative to produce an Egyptian royal standard of the Quran implemented by the King of Egypt. And that this edition has now become the norm for printed Quran in the modern Islamic world. So we can see that the Qurans that we hold, we collected in our house, belong to this edition. Text on first numbering system can be found both in marginalia and, of course, in chapter headings. Although the number of Quran manuscripts that provide this information in marginal like this, you can see in the marginalia, there is additional information about the differences in counting system in this surah. The presentation of this information in marginal notes gives us an impression of how knowledgeable the copies were about the Quranic and Islamic sciences, hinting at their intellectual background and the possible intention that they had in mind in their awareness during their Quran copying projects. In addition, the presentation of additional information in the margin shows a certain level of awareness among the scribal agencies or scribes working for individual benefactors or as individuals regarding differences over the number of verses that might be found in the Quranic chapters as well as over the placement of verse dividers. We could then pose the question of who exactly is in charge of determining what information should be given in the chapter headings, and where the placement of frondels in the main text should be. In studying the Quran manuscript preserved in Al-Khalili Institution collection, Professor Francois de Roche states that the material from the last part of the manuscript provides evidence of the close relationship between calligrapher or the copyist and illuminator was often the same person. But maybe the case will be different in the context of Southeast Asian Quranic manuscripts. And in her study of a Chinese Quran in Belgium, Dr. Annabel Gallop in 2011 points to the copyist as being obviously in charge of this. She said that after the text of the Quran was written in black, spaces were left for the surah headings, and then the scribe returned to the book to write in the headings in red ink. Also, in their observation about Quranic manuscript from Banten, Dr. Annabel Gallop and Dr. Ali Akbar note that both text in the chapter headings and the inner pages of Banten Qurans were always created by the same hands. This certainly indicates that in many cases, generally but not always, the copyists were personally responsible for both texts during the copying process. Both text means include main text and paratext or information, additional information located inside the chapter headings. Investigation of what actually happened during the copying process is essential to understand the apparent characteristics of Quranic manuscript produced in Southeast Asia, especially the three Qurans studied here. In this regard, I would like to propose a few points to consider. If there are two identical texts in translation, so there are three Qurans with three translations of the Quranic text, yeah, so three identical texts in translations, it doesn't mean that the copied texts of the Quran are also identical. The second one is, if there are three copied Qurans written by the same hand, or two copied Quran by the same hand, in this regard, A51 and W277 are written by the same hand, and Ras Arabic 4 was written by the different hand. It doesn't mean that the copies are the same, because it really depends on what systems as the norm that the copies intended to follow. Although the copies provided identical Malay translation in the Quran, there is a variation in the ways in which different reading systems and verse divisions were implemented. The fact that the three Qurans contain identical Malayan translations, alongside the fact that two of them appear to have been copied by the same hand, Quran A51 and W277, indicates strongly that they may have been produced in the same place. So we need to highlight this information. They have been produced in the same place and during the same general period of time in 18th century Banten. The logic is, if we do something, a project in the same place, so we gather, we have the same knowledge about what we are doing. It appears to have been the norm for different Quranic copies to use different systems, which implies that they were created for different purposes, although Qurans A51 and W277 were alike in terms of the number of volumes produced. This is already Dr. Annabel brilliantly explained in her presentation. But for a physical description of these two Qurans, please refer to publication by Dr. Annabel Gallop and Ali Akbar in 2006 in Archipel Journal. This is also the case with Quran Ras Arabic 4, despite the fact that this copy physically looks more compact as it is only a single volume text. In Muslim societies, only the recited text of Quran is considered the norm. In one of his publications, Professor Francois de Roche said that, this one, in the traditional Muslim view, only the recited text matters. When the Al-Azhar specialists convened to produce a reliable edition of the Quran toward 1920, they never thought of looking for the earliest written witnesses, had they known how to identify them, but used in the course of the work the specialist literature on the Qira'at or the orthography which developed in Muslim scholarly circles from the 2nd Hijri or in 8th century onwards. This raises a question. Did the practice of consulting Qira'at and orthographical literature exist in the Quranic manuscript tradition in early centuries or prior to the Al-Azhar project? In this regard, information about the textual relationship of Quran manuscript produced in specific region may help us to answer these questions. I examine whether the copies of the three Quran consistently use a specific reading system during their copying projects. My textual examination of this copy is actually supported by my previous work in 2020 on Qurans A51 and W277, where despite being written by the same hand, both copies show the use of a different reading system, indicating that both copying projects were deliberately undertaken in a particular way in order to serve a specific purpose. In addition, Dr. Annabel Gallop in 2022 has recently investigated the existence of another copy, Ras Arabic 4, which shows a resemblance in its Malay translation to both Qurans A51 and W277. So actually this is the, this is the preliminary examination about the connection between one copy to another. So, Dr. Annabel Gallop specifically stated Ras Arabic 4 uses the reading transmitted by Hafiz, and this is very important, and can therefore be linked more closely to W277 than to A51. So, is this statement right? So we can elaborate later on. In my examination of, so I used the Surah Al-Kahf as the case. So in my examination of this surah, the Quran copies of the 18th century Banten seem to have brought their awareness and knowledge of science of Qira'at to their work. The production of the Qurans A51, W277, and Ras Arabic 4, for example, clearly proves that the copying of the Quran from an older copy did not necessarily mean reproducing an identical work. This is something theoretically different from the mainstream understanding to build a stemma of the manuscript that always put the oldest codex as the norm, as I put this assumption in the beginning. And this is, of course, not the case with the production of the Quranic text. As will be elaborated, we see that the copies approach the various reading system as norms that they were legitimately entitled to modify while making a copy, as opposed to having to faithfully copy the reading system as used in their manuscript prototypes. You can see here, if you can see clearly, Quran A51, there are main text using Nafi or columns. Then in the marginal notes, the copies sometimes put additional information about the alternative readings, which clearly belongs to Hafiz readings. So in this regard, the copies of A51 use the Nafi colon as the norm for writing this Mushaf or this Quran. Yeah. Examination of the selected words in Surah Al-Kahf from both Quran A51 and W277 shows that despite being written by the same hand, the two copies were meant to target different readers. When it comes to Quran A51, the copies clearly followed Nafi colon's readings, which seems to have been uncommon among ordinary lay Bantenese Muslims at the time. The copies then presented reading option in the margin, which mostly accord with the Asim Hafiz readings. And the identification of the same selected words in Quran W277 reveals that the copies, the same who produced Quran A51, also copied the Quran based on the Asim Hafiz readings. You can see here, in the margin, there is no more additional information about the alternative reading, which means that the copies of the W277 strictly stick to the to use the Hafiz reading as the norm for writing this Mushaf. Ras Arabic 4, on the other hand, is different, copied by a different hand. Analysis of the same selected words in Surah Al-Kahf supports Dr. Annabel Gallop's statement in 2022 publication that its production was intended to accommodate a common recitation practice that follows Asim reading as transmitted by Hafiz. Despite uncertainties in few words that can be found in Ras Arabic 4, I can see that the way the copies handled Asim Hafiz reading as the basis for his copy were more consistent than in Quran W277. You can see in the Quran W277, for example, in verse 34, Sumurun, we can still find a reading by Nafi colon's reading, Sumurun, not Samarun. And also Ana Akolla Nafi colon's reading is still there in Quran W277. But in in the Quran Ras Arabic 4, the copies of this Mushaf more consistently use Hafiz reading as the norm for writing, for scribing, copying this manuscript. In addition, the copies also change, this is very interesting, change the Basra numbering system applied in Quran W277 and also in Quran A51 to follow Kufan system. So previously, the scribe of the Quran A51, they still use Basran system, Basran counting system. And the same hand who produced the Quran W277, he still consistently used additional information about the counting first counting system based on Basran counting system. Considering the evidence relating to applied reading system and first division in the analysis above, we can now propose a schema chart of how these particular three Qurans are connected to one another. I'm inclined to conclude that Quran Ras Arabic 4 may have been the final copy to have been made, and that it was undertaken with consideration of two other earlier copies of the Quran. And during the copying process, the copies of this Quran seem to have taken Quran A51 as the primary reference while taking the existence of Quran W277 into account. So there's three Quran actually are added together when the project were in progress. The fact that attempts were made to change the norms of the established reading system in both Quran W277 and Ras Arabic 4 give us an idea of the relationship between the transmission and copying of Quranic text and development in existing Qiraat scholarship in 18th century Madin, and shows that some Qurans were not merely the product of textual transmission based on memory or the verbatim production of older copies. The text in W277 and Ras Arabic 4 seem to reflect the popular Hafiz reading that is commonly used by lay Muslims, and no other reading option are found in either copy. A different purpose is indicated by the information on reading system and first division provided in Quran A51, which seems to have targeted advanced readers, displaying a variety of information in the margins about reading option that is mostly based on the Asim Hafiz Qira'ah. Instead, a contrasting situation is seen when one looks at the applied first numbering system. Despite being copied in confirmation with Asim Hafiz reading, the number of verses as indicated in the chapter heading of Surah Al-Kahf in Quran W277 coincide with that of Quran A51 here. That is, both cite the chapter as containing 111 verses, a total that conforms to the Barstran calculation. Yeah. This conclusion is supported by addition of numerals in the margin of Quran W277 that were apparently intended to confirm that the placement of rondel accorded with the number of verses presented in chapter heading. I don't know whether you can look at here. So there is a small number there in red ink to confirm the placement of rondel to be in line with the Basran system. Conversely, Ras Arabic 4, which represent the number of verses according to Kufan system here, it differs in this from A51 and W277. You can, Surah Al-Kahf, Makiyah wa Yami'ah wa Ashara. This is exactly in line with Kufan system. As concluding remarks, we can apply this discussion to a broader context in the history of the Quran. Professor Raymond Farin in Qatar University notes that, politically speaking, the Umayyad dynasty clearly supported the application of Basran system in the Quran and that the scholar produced. Meanwhile, the Kufan system for centuries enjoyed the endorsement of Abbasid rules. And this system continued to be dominant during the Ottoman period. This picture is complicated by the fact that Quran's A51, W277, and Ras Arabic 4 shows diversities in the ways in which first division were placed. While some rondels clearly show idiosyncrasies, the placement of rondels that do not merely follow either Basran or Kufan systems give us a strong hint that awareness of Quran literature might have played a role in the production of certain Qurans in 18th century Banten. Last but not least, I suggest that this method of textual criticism remains useful for us when we are looking at later developments in the textual transmission of the Quran throughout the Islamic world, especially in Southeast Asia, where the earliest extant examples of the Quran come from the early 17th century or the late 16th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Dr. Ervan. We have now heard from our three keynote speakers, and I think before we move to the Q&A session, I think I'd like to highlight, I think we have common threads here between the three topics that presented by our keynote speakers. although our conference is talking about Southeast Asia, but I think both three topics somehow connected in Banten. Is it correct? So, is there anyone here from Banten? Our professor, Prof. Yanwar? Oh, okay, so many of us. Okay, you should be proud, and we should be proud that Banten is part of this civilization that portrayed by Professor Farish, that actually Islam and Muslim civilization has already embedded in that era. So, congratulations to Banten. Okay, and let's move to the Q&A questions, a Q&A session. Our apologies because we begin at 10 EM just now, so I think we can hold our hunger, yes, a bit little. So, okay, I will take 3 questions. Okay, from for the first session. Okay, please raise your hand, state your name and institution, and also please state the speaker that you want to address to, and also please straight to the question. Okay, without much introduction. Okay, please.
All right, thank you for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed the presentation. My name is Egi. I'm a lecturer and also teacher at Pesantren Darussalam Ciamis. I have 2 questions to Dato Anabel and also 1 question to my professor, Prof. Farish. 2 questions to Dato Anabel. First, I think in light of, maybe the op-ed of Mira Mentari's article at Medium that discussed on the repatriation of the lithograph Quran, of the one attributed to Teuku Umar, but then it is instead owned by Cut Nyadien. I want to know what is your opinion on the repatriation of certain collection from Netherlands to Indonesia. That 1 question. The other question is whether the repatriation of certain collections from Netherlands to Indonesia have some sort of aesthetic and also spiritual considerations that you mentioned in your presentation into account, or it is just historical, political consideration that take into account? That's my 2 questions. And to Prof. Farish, I have 1 question in related to your concern on the 19th century colonial encounter. So I happened to find a quite interesting report from the Dutch resident of Banjar during the time of Daendels. His name is Blooms, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he gave a daring critics to the Arab Sultan of Pontianak, Sultan Qasim at that time. When he visited Pontianak, he mentioned that, as I quote here, outwardly he is religious, but this religion is more hypocrisy, designed to inspire his subjects with an advantageous and awe-inspiring opinion regarding him. So my question is, with limited sources at hand for us who take interest in the subject of his history, how should we treat such obnoxious report? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. The second. Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fadli Lukman from UIII Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. Thank you very much for all the presentations. It's very engaging and I love it a lot. My questions kind of going around between Pak Farish and Ibu Anabel, so I'm not sure which one of you would respond. Probably more to Bu Anabel. From the manuscripts that you explained earlier, a few, I guess, 2 or 3, I'm not sure, have annotations from European hands, right? And my question is, can you elaborate on this European interest in this Quran around this time period in Indonesian or South Asian context. The background of the question is like around the same time, probably in Europe, the interest for Quran translations was also at a very, let's say, enthusiastic period, either as a polemical motif between Christian and Muslim, like they want to know Islam from the first source, so they wanted to see the Quran and translate the Quran, or as part of the Orientalistic program to learn Arabic. So I'm wondering if the European context of this interest to the Quran also transported into Southeast Asia, so they make annotation or translate Quran in Southeast Asia, but with this European mind at the background. So I hope you get my point. Yeah, thank you. That's my question.
One more question. Anyone?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much. My name is Kante Hamed from Islamic Studies. My question is in line with the question of Egi, talking about the repatriation of some manuscripts of the Quran. In West Africa, we have a king called Samori Touré, and we had this debate in West Africa last week about his manuscript of Quran, which was found in France. So the debate now is about Guinea and Ivory Coast. Samori Touré is a king who ruled around 1830. He was born in a land today's Guinea, but he was deported and taken by the French in Ivory Coast. So each country are calling the French to repatriate this manuscript. Guinea is calling, Ivory Coast also is calling. How do you think about this issue, since at that time we didn't have borders or these modern countries? Thank you so much. The second question is about the depiction of European colonial powers of some native citizens. In Ivory Coast, we had native people depicted by the colonial power to be the worst human being in the world. And people today in modern Ivory Coast are using this depiction of the colonial power against these native people to be the truth about them. So how do you think about this kind of problems that we can face in our modern countries? Thank you so much.
I think we should take 3 questions first. The first answer should be from Ms. Annabelle. I think you should answer all the questions so we don't back to back.
Thank you very much for the, yes, very interesting 3 questions. To deal, just I'll mention Mas Fadli's question first, and then I'll come back to Mas Egi and Mas Ahmad, and then perhaps Farish can continue from there. About the European interest in the Quran. Yes, from the sort of 17th century onwards, I think really Farish can say much more about it, because it really has to be seen within the larger picture of which Southeast Asia was an important but only a part of the picture. There was scholarship in Europe, and from what I understand, a lot of the interest in the Quran was actually inspired or propelled by studies of the Bible, and also in the need to go back to the original sources, the Middle Eastern sources. of that. I would just mention the name Paul Babinski, whose study is specifically on European learning on Islam in Europe in the early period, 16th, 17th, 18th century, and who has been extremely helpful to me. So if I want to identify the hand of the annotation, I will ask, Paul's advice, because so, for example, the small manuscript I put up of the early 17th century Quran fragment, he was able to identify the hand of Willem Leel, so a new name to me, a Danish merchant who is in the employ of the Dutch East India Company in Batavia by 1619. So that was really, really valuable. But I will pass it on to let Farish pick up the broader question of that. To turn now to Mas Egi and Mas Ahmad's question about the repatriation, particularly linked to the question of the Tengku Umar Quran, which has just come back to Indonesia. I think the main person to answer this will be Pak Oman, who I understand is on the repatriation committee in addition to all the other committees, national commissions we heard about yesterday, from the Memory of the World to all the registers. He's also on the National Repatriation Committee. In May, I was at a conference in Makassar at UNHAS, the Department of History, which was extremely interesting for me in a more unexpected way, because it was attended by senior members of the National Repatriation Committee for Indonesian Heritage Items, who outlined very clearly the incredibly detailed and nuanced and profound work that is going on in Indonesia on this question to identify, particularly on provenance research. And provenance research, that term was used over and over again to identify and to understand better those items which were deemed important for national heritage. So I remember being a little bit surprised myself when it was announced that, that the Quran of Tengku Umar was being returned, repatriated, and it was a Bombay printed lithograph from the late 19th century. Although I did not have that in mind, I touched on it in the final slides in my talk when I said that sometimes to scholars, the difference between a manuscript and a printed book is absolute, because a manuscript is unique and the printed book is produced in thousands of identical copies. But I did stress that to the owners of these copies, it was a completely arcane and irrelevant distinction, because the meaning of the Holy Book was from the text and not from its physical manifestation. And so I understand that the choice of that particular Quran out of a number of different possibilities held in the Netherlands was because the provenance research revealed that it was the one that could be most strongly and firmly associated with Tengku Umar or Cut Nyak Dien. I think maybe Oman can say something more about that if necessary. So, so that is the reasoning, the long and detailed reasoning that goes behind. And I think just the emphasis on provenance research will perhaps go towards answering Mas Ahmad's question about the West African / Kenyan case, to show that the provenance research is the most important element, which kind of, which allows you, it's not a very simple yes-no answer or black and white answer. It allows you to sort of go through the layers and work out a response on the basis of all the sort of the long history of these items. At this conference in Makassar, which was attended by Pak Boni Triana, Professor Margono, and Professor Ismunandar, it was stressed, it was emphasized that there is no heritage studies courses in any Indonesian university yet. And so this emphasis on provenance research is really quite a new thing. It's incredibly important. It's important for the national interest, but it's something that's having to be developed at quite a late quite a late and sudden stage now. It's in all what we call memory institutions, libraries, museums. It is a really important part of our work. I mean, it started in social sciences terms, much longer from anthropologists, and the social history of things, the biographies of manuscripts is a really important consideration now. So in addition to philology and codicology, it's the social history, the social codicology that needs to be taken into consideration. Shall I pass on to you now, Farish?
Maybe very briefly. I suppose what I was trying to show just now is that when the way in which a lot of post-colonial historiography has presented that entire colonial period in Southeast Asia, this is very common in many post-colonial states in Southeast Asia, is to paint everything with one brush. And it gives this impression that the quote-unquote colonial era was a sort of static time when identities were fixed and they don't really change. What I'm trying to show here is that when you go back to the late 16th, early 17th century, you see that, okay, this is the beginnings of the colonial encounter, but the identities were not as fixed then. So the question that Egi raises, right, about perceptions of say, Arabs or Indians, it already starts in the 17th century, but by the time we get to the 19th century, and it's not just Dutch officials writing about that. Paul Hedges and I wrote a paper about how people like Stamford Raffles and John Crawford saw Indian Muslim merchants and Arab Muslim merchants in exactly the same way. It builds upon what was already laid down 300 years before that, but by the time we get to the 19th century, then clearly the language sometimes comes across superficially as a critique of Islam, but it's not. Fundamentally, because this is not theology, it's about markets and it's about gaining access. And when people like Crawford and Raffles and their Dutch counterparts write about this at the time, about Indian polities, Arab polities, Arab leaders, Indian leaders in Southeast Asia, there's jealousy. There's jealousy. That's why I wanted to show you that image of the public assembly. You have an assembly where all the different communities of Banten are there and they're thrashing out legal issues among each other with the king present. But the one thing that unites all of them is that they're all Muslims, because that establishes it as a Muslim polity. But it also means that for Jan Huygens, who watched this as a non-Muslim, he doesn't get access. And that frustration will continue to build and build and build all the way up to the 19th century. And I think it's out of that frustration also you have then this growing interest in Islam. But the growing interest in Islam is again, it's not homogeneous. There's genuine theological interest, like what is this religion? But it starts off with the idea that this is a religion. Yeah? So it already begins with the idea that Islam is a religion. But what is it? So you have the theological concern. But then, of course, by the 19th century, you've got people like Snauko Gronje who are concerned about Islam and also want to know its theology, but they're worried about the politics of Islam. And certainly by the 19th century, you have the fear of the mobile Muslim. Because, Muslims have feet, Muslims walk, and when they walk, they meet other Muslims, and then they do things which the colonial establishments don't like. They conspire, they meet, they plan, and what have you. And so then a lot of the study of Islam, that's when we start looking at studies on the Hajj, for instance. Right? The Dutch in particular become very obsessed with why are these people going on Hajj and what are they planning when they are there and we don't see what they are doing. So I think we need to be nuanced when we talk about these things, because the motivations might come, the language used might be the vocabulary of religious difference. But behind that, underneath that, there are also political, economic considerations that are actually very real. That's guiding it, yeah, by the way. And I don't want to give a misleading impression that Jan Huygens, for instance, was only obsessed with the Africans, Arabs, and Indians and Chinese in Banten. He has one major adversarial other, which I did not touch on, but it becomes very clear in the text. His number one enemy are the Portuguese. In the same way that when you read Raffles' History of Java, Raffles can speak disparagingly about the Javanese, but the ones he really hates are the Dutch. Because this is the era of Western colonial competition where Southeast Asia becomes the battleground for competing European geo-economic interests. Now, somewhere in there, then suddenly the study of Islam begins, because Muslims are part of the landscape of Southeast Asia. And so if you want to control this landscape, you need to understand the people, and that's where we begin to see this. I mean, Kern writes about this, yeah? When he looks at modalities of knowledge production in colonial India. First thing the British do when they take over Bengal is they start translating texts, because you need to understand the people to understand the landscape, then you can actually do things with the landscape.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer from Dr. Annabel and Professor Farish. And since the questions were addressed to both speakers, and I'd like to address two questions, or maybe one question to Dr. Erfan, about the thing that you mentioned about the concept from the Western manuscript says that once the manuscript were copied, it's already broken, it's already corrupted, right? But it's different with when it comes to Al-Quran manuscript, because when from the earlier period during the Khalif Abu Bakr and also Khalifah Uthman, Al-Quran was actually copied, right? So begin from this perspective, how do you think about this? Well, when you presented on the Banten traditions, manuscript were copied each other from one manuscript to another manuscript. So how do you think, is this tradition also, I mean the copying of manuscript of Mushaf in Banten also happen in another province in Indonesia, for example in Aceh or maybe Sulawesi, that maybe presented by Professor Oman yesterday? This is my first question. And then my second question for Dr. Erfan, I think, do you have any academic evidence for the people or the person who copied the manuscript from that you mentioned before? Yeah, is this people or is this person were trained in, I'm not sure, maybe in Haramain or from certain schools, maybe? This is my two questions for Dr. Erfan. And please.
May I?
Oh, okay.
I hope you don't mind if I add another question for Erfan.
This is become interesting. Okay, please, Ms. Annabelle.
Because I'm just so excited about what you presented, Erfan, of, as you say, introducing another new criteria which we can apply to manuscripts in addition to, say, decoration or calligraphy, but another yardstick that we can use perhaps to group and to identify and to trace the lineage of certain manuscripts. So numerology, if you like, or the number of verse markers is one part of the study of the statistics of the Quran. And I've noticed that Sulawesi Qurans, more than any others, because it's not something I've paid much attention to. I haven't gone around comparing the number of verses in the chapter headings, but in Sulawesi Qurans, there's a consistent interest in the numerology of the Quran, not just the number of verses, but the number of letters, a number of words in each surah. So I just wondered whether you have looked yet at any Sulawesi Qurans and whether you have noted that they form a consistent grouping, all following one of the systems of verse numbering, or whether it's work that you haven't started yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I hope that there will be no question for me. I kept silent for many years regarding this research because it's very difficult to make people understand what I'm doing. But I'll try to answer all the questions, and I'm sorry if it's not entirely correct. Okay, first of all, it's about the tradition. Did the tradition exist in other regions? The normative answer is, of course, yes, because it has been in the copy's mind that it also depends on the intellectual background, and also it's also about the social acceptance about the who should copy or scribe the Quran. It cannot be people, ordinary people who have no knowledge. So it must have been scholars, selected scholars who have a deep knowledge, not only about Islamic sciences, but about the Islamic calligraphy, about the, of course, Quranic sciences. In this regard, with all this knowledge, they can make a decision what norm they use for writing Quran, what rondels should be there. This is very interesting, the rondels. There should be there, for example, if we, Alif Lam Mim should be rondel there, Zalikal Kitabula ila akhiri should be rondel there, should be an awareness. So we will find the awareness or the knowledge of the copies there. I can give one example, but it is not, doesn't come from Southeast Asia, come from Ottoman period. So in 13th century, we have a very famous copies, Yaqut al-Musta'simi, and Yaqut al-Musta'simi, as far as I can, as far as this research is concerned, there are about 11 Quran manuscripts copied by Yaqut al-Musta'simi. My preliminary examination, even the same copies, the same person who produced many manuscripts, the rondel is still different. So this is also still questioning why the same person produced many copies, but the result is different. What was really happening at the time? So actually, it still need for the investigation. But for sure, what we found in the way that the copies of these three Quran from Banten do these things with their knowledge, it also happened in other regions of in the Islamic world in the copying traditions. And the second one is about the training, about the everything that knowledge, education that the copies, the scholars who are in charge of the projecting the Qurans. I think many of you already visited Oxford. Yeah, when I visited Oxford for the first time, I can see that there is a college, Queen College, existed, established in 16th, 17th century, and this is college existed, established in a very long time ago. If I can say if the Bantenese Sultanate, or not Banten Sultanate, I mean the Bantenese Islamic Center still existed today, I think we can have something like Oxford University. So, because in the Bantenese kingdom at the time, especially in the 17th century during the Abu al-Mafakhir I, the first, and then the golden age was in the Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, they regularly invited scholars from Arabia, from Gujarat to stay. It is just like I myself, I was invited to Germany for a certain period of time. I got rewarded there. This kind of activity, giving reward to the scholars, is also happened in the Bantenese Sultanate. So they invited scholars to stay in Banten as long as they can, or it depends on how many years the scholarship was offered. So we can see the Bantenese Islamic centers were established, strongly established, and then it became the center of Islamic study in the Southeast Asian region. You can see, for example, Pak Oman already studied about the connection between Mindanao and the Bantenese kingdom. So there are some of the scholars or students from Mindanao before going to Hijaz, they came to Banten for a certain period of time to study Islam, and then they embark to Achanit, then go to the Gujarat and the Hijaz. So the answer can be both. The first one, they traveled to Hijaz for pilgrimage for the certain time of for the period of 1 or 2 years or more to study Islam there, or Bantenese Bantenese kingdom also were able to conduct certain level of the Islamic studies, Islamic pedagogical practices there. It can be proven with the existence of many manuscripts that can show us the advanced level of Islamic studies they reached at the time. So there are some manuscripts contain Qiraat, and some other manuscripts also very interesting. For example, Tafsir al-Asrar, we already discussed about Tafsir al-Asrar, which is not listed actually in the Islamic world, but it existed in the Bantenese Sultanate. It is actually the local epithet of the Tafsir Rusbian al-Baghdadi. And the third one is, sorry, I forgot. Actually, A51, the manuscript like A51 is found in other regions. For example, in the I think you already mentioned in your article about Quran from Bone. It's also existed Quran like this in Malay Peninsula. So the Quran, the copies of the Quran provide additional information in the margins. I don't know for sure about how far, to what extent they were so much interested with the first numbering system here, because the research is still in going progress. But for example, if I can refer to my my data here, for example, the trend is almost similar to other regions. For example, I focus on one rondel located in the Quran Al-Baqarah, verse 61 here. So there is an idiosyncratic first marker. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يَكْفُرُونَ. It should not be rondels there, but 23 manuscripts out of 41 manuscripts being studied here put the rondels there. And it also the case with the 2 out of 3 manuscripts from Eastern Archipelago here from Bone, the copies, I think this is the one you discussed in your paper. He also put the rondel there for unclear explanation. The reason why many copies of the Quran at the time put idiosyncratic first number. I think this is kind of the local wisdom or something like that, because it never have existed in other regions. Okay, I think this can be that's all, and hopefully it can answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause. Okay. Thank you to everyone who participated in this discussion. And once again, our sincere thanks to Ms. Annabel Tehgalob, Professor Farish, and Dr. Ervan Nur Tawab for their outstanding contribution to this morning. Their presentation have given us a rich picture of how manuscripts as material objects and as texts reveal the diversity and dynamism of Islamic scholarship and practice in Southeast Asia. Before I share my closing reflection, I would like to invite Vice Rector, Professor Shafiq Hasim, to the stage to present tokens of appreciation to our three distinguished keynote speakers, Ms. Annabelle, Professor Nur, and also Dr. Nur Tawab. Please come forward to receive the token of appreciation. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Shafiq. And as we close this session, allow me to leave us with one reflection. As Muslims, we believe that the Quran is the words of Allah, divinely preserved, because Allah said so in the Quran, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. And what our speakers today have shown us this morning is precisely how that promise unfolds in history, through the hearts and the hands of the believers who memorize FIS Sudur, and also copied FIS Sutur, and carried it across ocean to this archipelago, and ultimately through the reminder to all of us, scholars and researchers, that the Quran was never meant to remain merely as an object behind glass or data in a footnote, but living guidance, hudan linnas, that must illuminate our lives as much as it enriches our scholarship. I say this to myself first and to all of us. Thank you very much for your attention and active participation this morning. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And I give back to the house, or I give the announcement. Okay, Pak Aga should give the announcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mariam, and thank you to our three distinguished speakers and all participants for the fascinating discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, actually during dinner 2 days ago, I happened to overhear a conversation among our keynote speakers. They emphasized that Southeast Asia is becoming a new center for the study of Islamic manuscripts. Listening to the discussions over these 2 days, I think we have witnessed and perhaps even demonstrated the evidence of that observation. We have shown that Southeast Asia is not merely a place where Islamic manuscripts are found, but an important center for their study, interpretation, and preservation. We hope this conference will encourage further research, collaboration, and engagement with the rich manuscript and written cultures of Southeast Asia. Before I end this session, I have a few announcements. First, as usual, we'll have photo session in front of the Faculty A building. The committee will show you the location. And second, after that, we will have lunch. The lunch arrangements are as follows. First, for Her Royal Highness and honorary guests from Malaysia, University and Faculty of Islamic Studies Board, conveners, and keynote speakers, please kindly proceed to the smart meeting room for lunch, the same place as yesterday. Second, for the faculty members and chairs, please come to the VIP room behind this theater room for lunch. And for the presenters and volunteers, we have facilitated the lunch at the BI corner. And lastly, we'll continue the conference at 1:30 p.m. because Pak Zaki requested to have more time for maslahat, makan siang, sholat, and istirahat. I'm Birawa Anuraga, half Bantenese. It has been my pleasure to serve as your master of ceremonies. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, Pak Aga, shouldn't we take picture first? Oh, outside the faculty, okay.